Welcome to Grieving Insomniacs. I am your host, Christy Haberman. I am glad you're here. Thanks for being a part of our community. A few disclaimers before we get started. I am a licensed therapist. However, this podcast is not to be considered mental health therapy or counseling. It is for entertainment purposes only and is not associated with my counseling practice, Christy Haberman Counseling Services. Thanks for showing up. Welcome to Grieving Insomniacs. This is your host, Christy Haberman, and Kai the Wonder Dog. We took last week off. I was feeling a little under the weather. I have been working really hard for the last 2 or 3 months at my job I have during the day. And then I'm counseling in the evenings and doing the podcast. And I think I've kind of overextended myself a little bit. And I'm also at kind of a place in my podcast recordings that starting to lose a little motivation. And I'm wondering what I'm doing with the podcast. But as they say, when you have a purpose and it gets tough, you just keep on going. So I decided to bite the bullet today. And I didn't think I really had anything to talk about. But the other day I was rummaging around, and I've been thinking all week, what am I going to talk on the podcast about? Rummaging around. And I found my journal for right after Christopher died. And I thought I'd burnt them all. And I don't think it's a coincidence. I think that there's probably some stuff in here that will trigger some memories that I need to talk about so that I can help other people. And I hope you understand the purpose of my podcast. So the purpose of my podcast is for other grieving people to feel like it's okay to talk about their grief, to talk about these things that are so hard to face. And the expectations of society that has on us, that we move on, that we get over it, that it's not okay to be sad. And it's so wrong. It is so wrong. And I had an experience with one of my podcast episodes. I got some feedback that I didn't appreciate, I should say. And it's really hard to put yourself out there and be met with criticism. That's another aspect to it also. So I've decided to honor myself a little bit. And when those things happen, if I need to take a break, I'm going to take a break. And then I'm going to talk about them. Because I think they happen to all of us. We all have these moments, especially when you're grieving, I feel like. We all have these moments where someone says something maybe a little carelessly, and it just hurts you. I also made some decisions about the direction of my podcast, and I'm still looking for people to come on my podcast and that I would like to interview. I would like to interview authentic people that feel like they don't have anyone to talk to, because I want you to know that I am listening, that I am here, and that I honor you in your grief as I would hope that you honor me. I went to the doctor last week, a neurologist, because I have this spot in my eye. So I went to the neurologist because I have the spot in my eye. And it happens a lot at night. He says, "What are you doing up at night?" "Well, I don't sleep." Hence the name Grieving Insomniacs. See, but the thing with me, though, is I've always not slept. But my grief really hits me hard at night. 2, 3 o'clock in the morning. Even with sleep medication, I'll still be awake. And so he says to me, "Well, I saw in your records that your son died." "Yeah, he did." And of course I start crying. And he goes, "Well, I just want to make sure that your mental health is okay." And I'm looking at him like, and I said, "This is as good as it gets. Doesn't get any better than this." And he goes, "Well, who are you seeing?" So I go through my counselor history and then tell him my doctor. And he goes, "Oh, okay, as long as you're seeing someone." I'm like, "I'm here for my eyes. I'm not here for you to check my mental health because this is as good as it gets. I can cry when I'm sad about my son. Like, there's nothing wrong with that. That doesn't make me mentally ill. It makes me sad." And I just really wish we didn't live in this society, that's false society where we label emotions bad or good. There are no bad or good emotions. They are just are. And if we acknowledge the bad, i.e., grief, sadness, anger, you're more likely to experience the positive. If you're a balanced human being, and you got to work towards balance and this false positivity. I have someone that I work with that all about false positivity and all about being kind, and it comes out what we call sideways. And when anger and grief and sadness come out sideways, it comes out a little meanly, and it comes out in your comments, in the snarky comments. And when someone's saying snarky comments to you at the same time as preaching kindness and happiness and always being positive, that's someone that's not well balanced. And I'm rather proud of the fact that I can acknowledge how I feel. I am aware of how I feel. I check in with my body. That's one of the first things I teach my clients is check in with your body. Where does anxiety live? Where does depression live? How do you manage it? Do you recognize it? So anyway, so I had that experience with the doctor this way that just made me, and I'll be real, like, it really made me take a second look at what I'm doing with the podcast, because am I coming off too negative on the podcast? But folks, this is reality. This is my life. I'm sad every day. I spent the day yesterday with my granddaughter, and I enjoyed her, and I enjoyed spending time with her, but underneath everything, there's always this layer of sadness, this layer of melancholy. And on Facebook Memories, I had a post come up of a video of Christopher, and I just wanted to cry. It was just like, it's just, and I wanted to post it, so unfair. So his birthday's coming up in May. This is how it goes for me every year. And this is one of the things that I want to encourage on this podcast, is to learn to know yourself. Learn to know what your triggers are. Learn to know how you manage your grief, how you go through your daily life, because it matters. So I need to take a step back from some of the things that I am doing for the next 2 months. Maybe be not as ambitious at work, because I take on a lot of things that aren't necessarily my wheelhouse. So I'm going to back off some of those projects at work. I'm going to do a little bit more self-care and do probably a little bit more journaling, so that when I'm getting through these next 2 months will be more helpful. And so I was talking to someone about this, and we're talking about how an ordinary conversation, and what I mean by an ordinary conversation is I go in, well, like happened at the doctor's office. I'm not expecting to talk to the doctor about my child dying, but there it is, and I'm not prepared for it. And then I'm not prepared for the judgment that comes from it. So that's one of the things that I think as a society that we have to take a look at and stop and reconsider is the small talk. We would never ask someone's political views when you first meet someone and you're talking about, so are you a Trump supporter? Are you a Biden supporter? Are you a this? Are you a that? Are you a libertarian? We would never ask those questions. Why? Because we were taught you don't talk about religion and you don't talk about politics, which is a pretty good rule to follow. So, why do we talk about such personal topics as how many children do you have? How come that is an acceptable thing to say in small talk? I used to be very outgoing. My friend, my best friend said I could make friends with anyone. And that's pretty much true. I'd go into the grocery store, I'd start talking to somebody, I'd talk to this person, I'd talk to that person. I was really actually pretty social. And then Christopher died. And I would share inappropriately. I was so desperate for connection with someone that I would tell everyone Christopher died. And then you get the negative reaction, so it's like, okay, so I got to draw back a little bit. It's like you trying to find your balance in this situation. And every person determines how this works for themselves differently. Some people, they're okay with talking about it with everyone, and they can handle the looks that people give them and the other things that come from that. And then there's those of us that don't want to talk about it. And I never could control my tears. For some reason, I thought that that was an important piece of my grieving was that I not cry. And I think about wanting to go do presentations and talk about how awful it is to be a grieving mom, but I don't know how not to cry when I talk about Christopher. And I'm slowly moving to this place of acceptance. So for me, social talk, small talk, social connection, especially in meeting new people, is very, very hard. I don't want to talk about my children. I don't want to talk about my grandchildren. I don't want anyone invading that area of my life, which is really interesting, isn't it? Because I have a podcast about that very fact. In fact, I won't tell anybody at work I have a podcast because I don't want any of them listening to it because I don't feel I can be vulnerable with them. And probably because sometimes I talk about work, but there's that. But yeah, I won't tell them. Don't my friends know, my really close friends, but mostly in the town where I live and the people I interact with at the grocery store, whatever, no one knows. Like I keep that to myself. And I think it's because of this whole issue of small talk. Is that I don't know how to do small talk and talk about my son without crying. And those of you out there in the service industry, massage therapist, hairstylist, nail technicians, and you're trying to make connection with your clients, I would encourage you not to ask about how many children people have. And I've talked about this a little bit on the podcast before, but I really avoid it. I only ask the question, I should say, I only answer the question when I feel somewhat backed into a corner. Because if I can turn it around on you or redirect the question somewhere else, I won't answer. So let's talk about some ways to deal with the issue of small talk. Now, there's the direct route. And until I got this current job, well, actually, before I came back to South Dakota, um, I was really valued as being honest and direct, and people really appreciated that about me. In fact, some people say it's my best quality. When I moved back to South Dakota, that was not one of my best qualities. In fact, it's one that gets me in trouble the most at my job or anywhere else with people. They just they don't do the direct route. And I don't know if I could do it either. So the direct route in responding to someone that asks you how many children you have and you don't really want to answer it is, I'm not comfortable talking about that with you. Now that takes a lot of courage. But understand when you start the conversation by answering it the first time. Let's see, what are some other things that you could say? You could say, "Oh, um, I don't really like talking about myself. So try to pick, so what kind of hobbies do you have?" Things like that. And because nowadays our world is getting not safe. So it's probably not a good idea to put it out there. How many children you have, where you live, all of that kind of stuff. Because I've had a conversation, and I think was it the last time I got a haircut? I don't remember. Anyway, this lady was just like, "Oh, so how many kids you have?" I said, "Oh, I have two." And then she asked me, "Oh, so what do they do?" Still pretty safe ground. Christopher was, and I say was, and if they're paying attention, they'll pick up on the was. And hopefully if they're paying attention, they'll stop, right? But they don't. Most people don't. And I say, "Oh, Christopher's or Colin's a computer tech and Christopher was a nurse." Oh, and then where do they live? Now I really wanted to, and I know I've talked about this on another episode, but I really wanted to tell her that Christopher lived at Bear Butte Cemetery, but I want to be nice. Like, I don't think I have to be mean. And so I don't. And once people realize they made a mistake, I don't know if it's the look on my face, I don't know. I've been told I have pretty wicked RBF face, but never used to be like that. I think nowadays it's just because I walk around with this cloud around me. So some of the other ways that you could talk about it is you could redirect the conversation. That's what I try to do. Especially if they have pictures of their own kids, like on the mirrors, or you can say, "So I came here and I want this style." You could just not answer the question at all. There's that option. If you're going in for massage therapy, you just be like, "I don't like to talk while I'm getting a massage. I just want to live in peace." And that's okay too. And then there's the other side of it that they want you to ask about their children and talk about that. But in that also, you got to stop and consider the reaction of the other people and how they're going to cope with the information and what they're going to do with the information. Because sometimes for me, the reaction of the other people listening is almost worse. It's worse than if they had said nothing at all, you know? It's just kind of it's just a hard path to walk. It would just be better if we just didn't talk about those kind of things. If it went on to, and I can't even imagine the people that are having fertility issues and people start asking them if they have any kids yet. I imagine the sensation is somewhat similar. Or if your baby died of SIDS, I mean, and then how terrible do you feel when you ask that question? And the other option is you could just not put it out there. You could just not put it out there. Because some would say, well, if I never told anyone that Christopher died, like me telling the doctor, I could just say the year. But then they always ask, so what happened during that year? Well, I don't know. My son died. And I was going to ask the doctor about something else. And he said, well, we're not here for that. And I'm sitting there thinking to myself, well, I wasn't here to talk about my mental health either, but here we are. It's just kind of funny. Just kind of funny. So the other thing that you could do, because people like to gossip, they just do. It's just like a fact of life. You could make it known around you that you don't want to be asked. And maybe that'd be easier than waiting for people to ask. And maybe that's the route I should go, because I always get so depressed when people don't remember Christopher's birthday and they don't remember, the day he died. And like you'll be in the same room with him and you're being sad and you'll talk about him dying and no one will even acknowledge you or validate you. So is that easier or is that harder? Is it harder just not to say anything? I haven't come to a conclusion yet because Christopher was an important part of my life. His dying was an important part of my life. It is not something that I want to repeat by any means. It has just been life-changing. See, and that's the other thing that I wish people would understand is that it's okay that it was life-changing. Like, don't expect me to be the same because I'm not. People grow, people change. Why can't it be that way with grief too? And then the people that get mad too because you're still grieving, and it's kind of like, what do you expect? What do you expect? I really think that what they expect is for you not to inconvenience them. That's what I think. Because in our society, people don't like to feel. They don't like to feel your emotions. They don't like to feel their emotions. And I realized the other day, actually, that one thing my grief has taught me is emotional regulation. I had a situation at work. Always it's work, right? And someone said something to me that was kind of judgmental and rude. And I responded in an appropriate manner. But there was another part of me that wanted to lash out in anger. And I realized that, like, putting up a boundary, like, don't talk to me like that. That's a terrible thing to say, that kind of thing. And I didn't. I, like, walked away and I realized, well, this is what emotional regulation looks like. Emotional regulation looks like me not exploding on you because you said something mean and cruel. Me not reacting to how people act and behave and bully and You know, that's emotional regulation. Now, I don't consider not crying about Chris emotional regulation. Now, I can regulate my emotions surrounding my grief because there are a lot of days I go through the day and I don't cry. And then there's other days, like at the doctor's appointment when I got blindsided and I wasn't prepared for him to, one, ask me about my grief, two, judge me about my grief, and then three, say I was mentally ill because I was still grieving. I'm still mad about that. I stewed on that for 3 or 4 days. And I wanted to write negative things about him, and then I thought, no. At the same time, they're saying, oh, I couldn't imagine, but there's something wrong with you because you're sad. Well, if you can't imagine, how can you know that I'm supposed to be better? That's what I want to know. I don't know. I just know that in our day and age, we need to change the appropriateness of asking people about how many children they have. And it is always my hope that non-grieving people will listen to my podcast and they will listen to me talk about it because I am only the spokesperson. I am only the voice. There are lots and lots of people out there like me that when you ask them how many children they have, they just cringe inside because they don't want to answer that question because you have just triggered their trauma. And if we're going to become a trauma-aware society, we have to stop asking people how many children they have. Us as females, that's how we determine our social connection, right? Are you married? Are you single? Do you have children? We have to find a better way to find connection among us. And I'm just as guilty as the one before us. But I would hope to think that after Christopher dying that I would do better and that I would be different. And that I would know better to ask, how many children do you have? And if I know somebody that's lost a child, I would include them. I've seen this thing on Facebook. I don't remember the context exactly. But it was about belonging. That part of what's wrong in our society now was that we had lost the spirit. It might have been the holistic psychologist. She's on Instagram. And she says what she sees right now in society is we lack our spiritual connection. And part of what we need for our spiritual connection is a sense of belonging. And that is so very, very true. But we need to find it through another way than talking about our children. And I feel like that surrounding the whole, I'm doing a podcast about Mother's Day next week, is Mother's Day. And there's a bereaved Mother's Day, and then there's a Mother's Day. And I kind of feel like that leads us to be separated when all we're all doing is looking to belong. We just need some place to be a part of. So next week we'll talk about Mother's Day. I don't know about the rest of you, but I'm dreading it. Every year I dread it. I hope you have a good week. I hope the sun is shining where you are. We finally got some warm weather where I am. We've had a lot of snow this year. Thank you for listening. This is Christy Haverman, and have a great week.